The Conservative leadership contest is heading to Scotland with Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak to take part in a Hustings event in Perth. They're hoping to win the votes of Scottish Tories as they bid to replace Boris Johnson as Prime Minister next month. Our political correspondent Phil Sim has more.
Scotland has not been a key battleground so far in the Tory leadership race. That's possibly because these contests thrive on differences, and Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss actually agree in their key Scottish policies. Both of them are against an independence referendum, and they want their government's decisions to apply UK-wide. And both have announced new measures they say would help hold the Scottish Government at Holyrood to account. The SNP, meanwhile, replies that the candidates are the same in another way, that both of them are wrong for Scotland.
Lots of discussion of the Tory party leadership campaign because both of them will be at Hustings in Perth tonight. Daily Express, Truss, I will fight off bid to split the union. Liz Truss last night pledged to deliver for Scotland. The Daily Express is backing, of course, Liz Truss. The Scotsman leads with this as well. Tory rivals vow to increase scrutiny of SNP decisions. Liz Truss, the front runner, has said that she wants to give MSPs special legal protection, allowing them to be more outspoken as they scrutinise decisions made by the devolved government, whereas Rishi Sunak vowed if he were elected to lead the UK, the Scottish Government would be required to publish consistent data on the delivery of public services.
The Daily Mail's focusing on comments from Liz Truss. Apparently she's vowed to take on out-of-touch Sturgeon, as she calls the First Minister.
Let's get the very latest BBC Radio Scotland news. The two contenders for the Conservative Party leadership are promising to ensure greater scrutiny of the Scottish Government. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak will take part in a hustings with Tory party members in Perth this evening as they battle to replace Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. James Cook reports.
At the heart of the Conservative campaign in Scotland lies the question of how to tackle the SNP. Liz Truss has previously suggested simply ignoring the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, calling her an attention seeker. Rishi Sunak said that was dangerously complacent. Now, both contenders are promising to ramp up scrutiny of the Scottish Government. The Foreign Secretary's plan includes protecting MSPs from legal action so they can be more outspoken. The former Chancellor's suggestions include forcing ministers in Edinburgh to publish more digestible data.
And you're listening to Good Morning Scotland with Gary and Laura. And the two Tory leadership candidates will pitch for the votes of Scottish Conservative members this evening at a Hustings event in Perth. It's the latest and the only stop in Scotland in a series of events around the UK as Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss compete to become the next Conservative leader and therefore Prime Minister. Let's talk to our political correspondent, Phil Sim, who's heading to Perth tonight. Morning to you, Phil.
Morning.
Liz Truss, seen by many as a front runner. What are her policies when it comes to Scotland? The two contenders for the Conservative Party leadership are promising to ensure greater scrutiny of the Scottish Government. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak will take part in a hustings with Tory party members in Perth this evening as they battle to replace Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. Both have also stated their opposition to a referendum on Scottish independence and want their policies to apply UK-wide. Here's our political correspondent, Ione Wells.
The focus is going to be how both candidates plan to take on the SNP, take on Nicola Sturgeon and prevent further rises in support for independence. This is definitely going to be a key focus of their campaign. Boris Johnson wasn't popular in Scotland. He wasn't somebody who was active out campaigning in the Scottish Government elections back in 2021. A number of Scottish Conservatives were among the first to publicly distance themselves from Boris Johnson. So both candidates are going to be under pressure to show how they can rebuild that Tory brand in Scotland.
The only Scottish hustings in the Conservative leadership campaign takes place in Perth tonight. Can Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak square the circle of appealing to Scottish Conservative Party members while aiming to get Scots votes at the next general election? Well, let's speak to Claire Pearsall, who is a former special advisor to the UK Government. Claire, good morning to you.
Good morning.
What is the inside track, do you think, in terms of how these candidates view Scotland and the issues that Scotland faces?
I think the one thing that's been sort of most apparent is that Scotland has barely been mentioned during the whole leadership campaign. Both candidates, we've focused on where they differ. And when it comes to Scotland, when you start looking at what information has been put out there, they're sort of broadly similar. Their argument is they're critical of the SNP and the Scottish Government. They are not convinced that an independence referendum needs to be held. But other than that, there is very, very little detail about what they would actually do for the people of Scotland.
A summary of the news. The two Tory leadership candidates will pitch for the votes of Scottish Conservative members this evening at a hustings event in Perth. It's the latest and only stop in Scotland in a series of events around the UK as Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss compete to become the next UK Conservative leader and Prime Minister. Our political correspondent Phil Sim will be heading to Perth. He says when it comes to Scotland, there's little to differentiate the two candidates.
They agree on the core issues. They're both in favour of having more UK government policies apply right across Scotland and the UK as well. They're both against a referendum. You know, it almost doesn't need to come up, the issue of a referendum, because they're both just so against it. But I think they're both going to have to go out of their way to be more against it than the other in order to sort of stand out.
The two Conservative Party leadership hopefuls have both pledged to impose greater scrutiny of the Scottish Government. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have also stated their opposition to a referendum on Scotland's place within the Union. The pair will take part in a hustings in Perth later. The SNP says whoever gets the job, it will boost support for independence.
So the only Scottish hustings in the Conservative leadership race will take place this evening in Perth. Only Conservative Party members are allowed to attend. Of course, they're the only people who will elect the party's new leader. And the stakes couldn't be higher. The next leader, as you know, will become Prime Minister. Well, let's speak to two Conservative Party members who are going to tonight's event. Good morning to you, Jess Insall, who supports Rishi Sunak, and Daniel Hampsey, who's behind Liz Truss. Morning to both of you. I suppose, Daniel, let's start with you. What do you prefer about Liz Truss?
Because at the same time, Nicola Sturgeon ignored the result of the 2014 referendum. So there is different arguments.
Jess, is that a fair point that Daniel makes?
You're listening to Good Morning Scotland. It's 24 minutes to 9. So tonight, the only Scottish hustings of the Conservative leadership race. We did ask to speak to both candidates on the programme. We were told that neither was available. We are, however, able to speak to two Scottish Conservative MPs. Let's speak to Andrew Bowie, who's the MP for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine and is supporting Rishi Sunak. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary.
I'll speak to David Mundell, MP, who is supporting Liz Truss in this contest.